I've been a freelance land surveyor for about 15 years. Most of my work is solo, remote stuff. I'm usually camping out for days at a time in places nobody else is going to. I actually prefer it that way, or at least I used to. This happened about 4 years ago. I'd been hired to survey boundary markers on a parcel up in the mountains near the Clearwater region in Idaho. Remote doesn't even begin to describe it. It was 6 miles of hiking just to reach where I set up camp. I filed my route with the local ranger station like I always do, and I packed a week's worth of supplies. The first day went smooth. I found 3 markers, logged everything, and made it back to camp before dark. The forecast had called for cold and light snow, and that's pretty much what I got. By the second day, though, things started to change. We got way more snow than expected. The next marker was only about a mile out of the way, so instead of calling it right then and there, I figured, what the hell? That was a mistake. I honestly still think about how stupid it was not to just hunker down or make it out of the woods when I had a chance. The terrain was all hidden rocks and icy slopes under fresh snow, so to translate, the worst possible conditions to hike through. I was picking my way down a short embankment when my boot hit a patch of ice I never saw. One wrong step like that and you could die, and I mean that literally. I slid probably 15 feet before catching myself on a tree root. I was lucky not to have slid further, but the pain in my right ankle was instant. I tried to tell myself I was fine, but the moment I stood up, I audibly groaned in pain. I couldn't put much weight on that leg, and I knew it would be a few hours before I'd be able to walk normally. I was so mad at myself, but there was nothing I could do. I abandoned the rest of the work right there. No markers worth getting stranded over. I painfully made my way back uphill to the main trail and started the slow hike back toward camp. But after a few minutes, I noticed boot tracks on the trail, which seemed to have come from further into the woods on my left. They were heading in the same direction I was going, and they looked somewhat fresh, which I could tell by how sharp the edges were, despite the fact that it was snowing. I figured it was probably a hunter, or maybe someone from the landowner's crew checking on the property. It's not unusual to cross paths with people out there, even in remote areas. I didn't think much of it. I just kept moving, trying to keep as much weight off my ankle as possible. As the light started fading, I began hearing sounds behind me. At first, I chalked it up to normal forest noises, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I kept turning around and looking over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything. That part of the forest was pretty dense though, so if there were any animals stalking me or something, there's a good chance that I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. I stopped walking and the sound stopped too. Not right away. There was a delay of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but they stopped. I froze up and tried to listen for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing beyond the wind and snow. I started walking again, and this time the footsteps didn't resume, so I thought everything was good. But then a few minutes later, I heard those damn footsteps again. I kept turning around, but I couldn't see anything. It was especially freaky because I knew I wouldn't be able to run if there was a threat out there. That was the worst part. I would have loved to investigate or try to scare off whatever animal was stalking me, but I didn't have the mobility to do so. So I just kept moving. But then I heard something metallic off to my left. I don't really know how to describe it. It was this low sound, like something lightly hitting a fence post or a piece of equipment. It was freaky because there wasn't supposed to be anything but trees out there, so I had no idea what could be making a metallic sound of all things. The sounds must have distracted me, because it dawned on me that I hadn't been keeping track of those footprints I noticed earlier. I looked down and realized they were gone. I turned around frantically, but I couldn't see when they had branched off or if they had turned around or something. I kept looking to my left, trying to see through the trees so I could at least spot whatever had made the sound. My eyes locked onto something, and the alarm bells started going off in my brain. There was another set of footprints coming out of the tree line on my left, running parallel to mine through the snow. They weren't that far away, which was the most concerning part. Whoever had been ahead of me on that trail was now walking alongside me through the trees. At that point, I was so scared that I wasn't thinking straight. I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have just kept going. But instead, I spoke up, asking if anyone was there. I didn't get an answer, and after about 20 seconds of waiting, I knew I had to get out of there. But my stupid ankle was still killing me, so I couldn't move that fast. I wanted to run or at least jog, but I couldn't. I was pretty close to camp though, so I just told myself if I kept moving, I'd be fine. I wasn't hearing footsteps behind me anymore, which was good, but I knew there was someone out there, someone who had been ahead of me at one point, which did make sense. I was really close to my sight when I heard the sound of a heavy branch snapping from somewhere behind me. It obviously wasn't a natural sound, or I wouldn't bother mentioning it. I didn't stop moving. I kept thinking about how if I just made it back, I'd be good. And eventually, I did reach my campsite. It was fully dark at that point, and only after getting inside my tent did I realize I wasn't any safer in there than I had been hobbling through the woods. I started packing immediately. My stupid foot made it so hard to move quickly, but I tried my best to rush. I'd say maybe 60% of how scared I was due to the fact that in a fight or a chase, I would be completely screwed without the ability to move properly. Before I finished packing, I heard the thing that I had been dreading the whole time: footsteps right outside the tent. I was so unbelievably scared at that point, and I started thinking about all the options. The footsteps weren't approaching my tent, but rather circling it. There was nothing I could do but wait for them to charge my tent. The sounds of them circling went on for what felt like 5 minutes before everything went quiet. I hadn't heard whoever was out there walk away, but I didn't care. I was leaving, person or not. I finished packing and took a really deep breath before unzipping my tent and stepping out into the snow. The moment I got outside, I looked into the trees and screamed. There was a guy standing in the tree line staring at me. He was really old and sickly, almost like he was dying. He looked disgusting. I stared back at him. I was fully expecting him to charge me, but he didn't. I put my hands up and said, "I don't want no trouble," and he didn't respond. I didn't know what to do. The staring contest lasted a few minutes before he said something I still think about. He said, "You're a lucky man," then turned and disappeared into the woods. The rest of that night is pretty blurry, partly because I was still in so much pain, and partly because of the encounter. If that guy wanted to fight me or kill me, he probably could have. With my ankle all messed up, there would have been nothing I could have done. I finished packing and left, not even caring about it being dark. When I eventually got checked out, I was told I had severely sprained my ankle, and it was a miracle I hadn't messed it up worse by walking. I ended up reporting that freak in the woods, but I know nothing was going to come of it. I didn't take another winter contract for almost a year. I still do remote work, it's my livelihood and I'm good at it, but I don't camp alone on winter assignments anymore. I either bring someone with me, or I turn the job down. This is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I've lived in Alaska most of my life. My family moved to Fairbanks when I was 6, and I never really left. I spent my summers working fish camps as a teenager, started guiding professionally in my early 20s, and that's basically been my life ever since. I'm 29 now. I work seasonally as a wilderness guide in northern Alaska, and I've been doing it long enough that I don't really get rattled much out there. I don't get lost, or I guess I should say I didn't think I could get lost, because what happened 3 years ago kind of forced me to reconsider that. My boyfriend at the time was Randy. He grew up in rural British Columbia and was basically the male version of me when it came to the outdoors. Actually, that's not really fair to him because he was probably more experienced than me in certain areas, like winter navigation specifically. We'd been together about 4 years, and most of our relationship revolved around trips that would make normal couples absolutely miserable. Week-long hunts and backcountry camping where you actually have to plan or you'll die. That sounds dramatic, but it's literally true up here. The plan was to snowmobile between 2 state-registered cabins about 60 miles apart. We'd spend a night at each and be back home in 4 days. We'd done the exact trip twice before, and it was always fine. The weather forecast looked good when we left, so we weren't worried at all. The first day was completely uneventful. We got to the second cabin by late afternoon, ate these freeze-dried meals that Randy swore tasted good but were honestly terrible, and then we played cards. It was a pretty relaxing evening. The next morning, I woke up and realized there was a genuine storm going on outside. It was basically a full-on blizzard that came out of nowhere, which was super surprising given the fact that there had been nothing indicating precipitation in the weather forecast. Randy and I decided to brave the storm, despite the fact that we had plenty of food and could have totally waited another day. We should have waited another day. I know that now. Things went south really quickly. The wind was almost worse than the snow. It was really hard to see much of anything, so Randy opted to take the lead. I was just following the path of his snowmobile, which was admittedly a lot easier than navigating the terrain in low visibility without anything in front of me, which is why I don't blame him for what happened. I don't really know how it happened, but 1 second Randy was just plodding along, and the next, his snowmobile was on top of him. I jumped off mine and ran over to him, but it was too late. His leg was bent in a way legs should not bend. Keep in mind, this was a guy who had once finished a 2-day trek on a sprained ankle and didn't even mention it until we were back at the truck. The first thing I tried was getting him on my snowmobile. That was the obvious move. Just get him on the back and ride us both to the cabin. But Randy's 6'2" and probably 220 at the time, and those aren't like ATVs where you can just throw someone on the back and go. An Arctic cat in deep snow is already a lot of machine to handle by yourself. I got him up once, kind of half dragged him onto the seat behind me, and he lasted maybe 10 seconds before he slid off the side. The sound he made when he hit the ground is something I never want to hear again. I tried one more time, and it was worse. He couldn't grip with his legs at all, and every time the machine shifted even slightly, he'd start to go, and there was nothing I could do to hold him and steer at the same time. After the second attempt, he told me to stop, and the way he said it, he wasn't asking, he was telling me. That's when we both kind of accepted what the actual plan was going to have to be. I pulled out the satellite phone, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I actually managed to get a connection after a few tries, but I wasn't sure if my message about our coordinates and where we were got through. Relying on someone else to come save Randy was a terrible idea, and we both knew it. I knew what had to happen. I'd leave him sheltered with everything we had, then take my snowmobile and push for the nearest cabin to use the emergency radio. There wasn't really a discussion about it. Randy just looked at me, and I looked at him, and that was it. I got him set up with every extra layer we had and marked our coordinates on my GPS. He told me to be careful, and then he told me not to do anything stupid, and then I just left him there in the snow. I was navigating mostly by feel and GPS, but the circumstances seemed so dire that I was having trouble not freaking out. After about 45 minutes, things started feeling off, like landmarks weren't matching up and the terrain didn't look right. I kept telling myself it was the snow messing with my perception, but the feeling just got worse and worse, and then I saw smoke through the trees to my left. I angled toward it, thinking I somehow looped back to one of the cabins, but the structure didn't match either one. It was smaller and kind of ugly, honestly, with one side almost buried in a snowdrift. There was a faint glow from inside, and the smoke was coming from the chimney. At that point, I just realized smoke meant a person, and a person meant a radio, or at least a way to warm up enough to keep going. I killed the engine and trudged through the snow over to the door. I knocked a few times, expecting someone to come over and open the door, but no one did. So I tried the door handle and realized it was unlocked. I walked in and was kind of surprised to discover that it was really warm in there. It was definitely inhabited. There was a wood stove in the corner with a fire going and a bedroll on the floor. There was also a can of some kind of food on the floor with a spoon still in it. It honestly looked like whoever was living in there had walked out the door 5 minutes before I came in. I announced my presence, but no one answered, so I just stood there warming my hands and trying the satellite phone again. But I had no luck, which was pretty disheartening. Still though, I didn't want to go back into those treacherous conditions yet, but I had to. Randy's life was depending on it. As I was turning to leave, I noticed something sitting on the shelf on the back wall. I walked over to it and realized it was a pair of binoculars, along with a folded map and a notebook. I unfolded the map and realized it was a trail map of the area we'd been riding through. Sections of it were circled in marker, and I recognized some of them. 2 of them specifically. Both of the cabins we'd been staying at were circled, and there were dates written next to them in pencil. Some were from that winter, some were from the winter before that, and so on. I picked up the notebook and realized whoever it belonged to had been documenting people. There were descriptions of people, like what they were wearing, what direction they were headed, that sort of thing. I was instantly really unsettled. There was a good chance Randy and I were somewhere in that notebook, but I wasn't sticking around to check. I don't really know how to tell you what it felt like. It wasn't fear right away. It was more like every single thing in the cabin just sort of rearranged itself in my head. It didn't feel like a safe place anymore. I put everything down and went straight to the door, but before I could reach the door handle, I heard the loudest and scariest scream I've ever heard. It came from below me, under the floor. It was a woman, and they weren't saying anything, just screaming at the top of their lungs like they were getting stabbed. The shock made me literally jump, and I just ran for the door. I started my snowmobile as fast as I could and rode out of there without even looking back. I never got another glimpse of the cabin. I was a total mess after that, to the point where I don't really remember the rest of the journey. At some point, I made it to the real cabin and got through on the emergency radio. They had to dispatch a helicopter just to make it to Randy, and he was near death. Hypothermic for one, and his leg was in terrible shape, but he was alive and conscious. It was the worst few hours of my life, to the point where I have trouble even piecing together the sequence of events. Randy survived, but the experience was so traumatic that he swore off winter navigation forever, or at least as long as we were still together. I told as many people as I could about that cabin and that scream, and I was told they'd send someone out there as soon as the conditions were safe to do so. and you best believe I followed up on that. After a few days, they eventually told me they'd sent a small team out there, but they weren't able to find a structure matching my description and location. The guy I was speaking with actually had the audacity to suggest that I hallucinated the whole thing, and I flipped out on him. That was basically the end of the conversation. Randy and I broke up about a year after the incident, and it had nothing to do with any of this, but I still think about this all the time. There are really only 3 ways to explain what happened that day, and none of them are good. The first is that none of it was real, that I really did hallucinate everything, from the cabin right down to the scream. I was terrified and half frozen, and I just left my boyfriend to potentially die in the snow, and my brain constructed a detailed 10-minute experience inside a building that didn't exist. I can't fully rule that out. The second is that it was real, and that person screaming was someone who needed help, someone who I just left there, probably to die. The troopers either couldn't find the place or didn't try hard enough, and whoever was under those floorboards, I don't even know what could have happened to them. The only other explanation is that it was some kind of trap. Maybe the smoke and the light were supposed to draw someone in, and whoever wrote those notebook entries had been tracking people through that area for a while, looking to kidnap someone or God knows what else, and I had walked directly into it, or worse, maybe that trap had actually worked. That scream, maybe that was someone unlucky enough to walk into that cabin sometime before me, and if I had gotten there a little earlier, it would have been me under those floorboards. I'm not sure what to make of any of this. When I was a junior in high school, there was this girl I spent a lot of time thinking about. Her name was Sienna Rawlins. She had this alluring presence about her that's kind of hard to explain, but I'll try my best. She was really pretty, of course, but it was more than that. She had this mystique that I could never decipher, a mystique that you wouldn't typically associate with a generic pretty girl. She wasn't popular, and I got the impression that a lot of guys, girls too, were more intimidated by her than anything else. She wasn't warm and she didn't smile, and most people regarded her as weird. I didn't. I actually found her uniqueness kind of fascinating. Catching eyes with her would freeze me up, kind of like the way your body adjusts to a cold room or an unexpected gust of wind. She reminded me of snow, honestly. The way that a light snowfall can muffle everything around you, including your own thoughts. She had that quality, but it was like no one noticed but me. People just thought the way she kept to herself and never spoke was weird, but I was always dying to know what she was thinking. I read a lot of young adult fantasy novels around that time, so that probably had something to do with it. I wrote a lot around that time too. I actually named one of the characters in the story I was writing Sienna. You could say I was obsessed, but I also just liked that name. Anyway, I was walking up the stairs with my friend George one day, talking about that exact story, when he asked me what the characters' names were. So I told him, and of course, as soon as I mentioned the name Sienna, who turns the corner but the actual Sienna, walking with one of her friends? She flashed me a smirk, the closest thing to a smile you could get out of her, and she said, "Yeah, because you love me," or something along those lines. I was so embarrassed, and George started laughing, which made it even worse. She was already moving past me, clearly not interested in continuing the conversation, and my window was closing. I don't know what came over me, but right there on the spot, I asked her out. That actually got her to stop, and she gave me one of her famous icy stares. She didn't even have to speak. Her eyes communicated everything. How dare you even ask me that? But then she surprised me. She actually agreed and gave me her number. Then she said she'd text me and walked away, not even letting me respond. I was shocked, but that's how I ended up going on a hike with the girl I was obsessing over for months. The hike wasn't my idea, by the way. None of it was. She organized it all, and I got the impression that I had no choice but to go along with whatever she wanted, and I was fine with that. So fast forward to the weekend, and Sienna's driving us out to this trail she picked. I'd never been to it, and neither had anyone I knew. The drive was about 45 minutes, but it felt like 10 because I was so in my head. Sienna had her window down and was playing music from her phone, stuff I didn't recognize, which tracked. We pulled into this gravel lot at the base of the trail. There were maybe 2 other cars there. Sienna didn't even think twice. She just started walking, and I followed. For the first 20 minutes or so, things were actually great. Sienna was more talkative than I'd ever seen her, which admittedly still wasn't that talkative, but for her it was a lot. She asked me about the story I was writing, which was kind of embarrassing, but I gave her a rough summary while not trying to sound like an idiot. The trail narrowed after a while, and the trees got denser. We hadn't seen another person since the parking lot. At some point, the trail split into a fork. I asked Sienna which way, and she pointed left without hesitating. I asked her if she'd been here before, and she said no. I found that a little strange, especially considering how definitive she seemed to be about everything, but I didn't say anything. The left fork was noticeably less maintained. I started to get the feeling we were going the wrong way, but I wasn't going to question her. I must have been really in my head about that, because at one point, I realized I couldn't hear Sienna's footsteps behind me anymore. The trail had gotten so narrow that we were walking single file, and I had taken the lead since she had gestured me to go first. But when I turned around to check on her, she wasn't there. The trail behind me was empty. I yelled her name, but I didn't get a response. I was confused, so I started walking back the way we had come. I made it back to the fork, and she wasn't there either. I figured she had probably stopped to use the bathroom and didn't want me to notice, which was a reasonable enough explanation. But I looked around some more and realized there was no side trail for her to wander off on. She was just gone, so I decided to try the right fork. To my surprise, that side was even more overgrown, and the further I walked, the less it felt like a real trail. I kept calling her name like an idiot, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't imagine why she would have abandoned me, so I genuinely thought it was an honest mistake or something. At one point, I heard a branch snap somewhere off to my left, deeper in the trees, and then when I looked over, I saw movement. Something shifted behind one of the thicker trees. I instantly knew what was going on. It was Sienna messing with me. That would have been on brand for her, so I figured I'd turn the tables on her and surprise her before she could surprise me. I slowly walked over to the tree as quietly as I could, and at the last second, I jumped to the side to scare her. But as I was mid-yell, I realized it wasn't Sienna. It was a man. I was horrified, but it was too late. I was inches away from this tall, middle-aged looking man who didn't seem scared in the slightest. I instinctively took a few steps backward, and the guy just stared at me. Before he could say anything, I blurted out that I was just looking for my friend or something like that, which in hindsight was a completely useless thing to say. He clearly didn't care. He started walking towards me, so I turned and started walking back toward the trail, trying not to run. But then I heard a second sound, this time from my right. I looked over and saw another person moving through the woods. The second guy wasn't even trying to hide. He was just standing in the open watching me, and he was holding what looked like a tree branch in his hand. That's when I just ran. The second guy was blocking the path back to the trail, so I was just running through the woods with no real sense of direction, hoping there was another way back to the main trail. As soon as I started running, both men started running after me. They weren't even trying to be quiet about it anymore. I ran for a few seconds, but it was hard because the woods were so dense. Before I could react, something grabbed my ankle and I fell. It was the first guy, and he was trying to pin me down. I screamed and kicked, and by some miracle, I was able to get him off me. I scrambled back to my feet and kept running. My mouth was full of blood at that point. I don't think they followed me after that, but I didn't care. I ran until I found the trail, then kept running until I made it back to the parking lot. Sienna's car was still in the lot, but the other two cars were gone. Sienna wasn't anywhere in sight, which freaked me out. I started thinking those guys who had tried to catch me got her, and that she was in danger. I didn't know what to do. I must have called her phone like 10 times, and she didn't pick up. I was just about to call the police when she texted me, asking where I had gone. I was typing a response when I looked up and saw her walking out of the tree line completely calm. I yelled at her to hurry, trying to explain what happened, but she didn't seem fazed. I told her I wasn't kidding, but she seemed more irritated than anything. Either way, we got in the car and started leaving. I told her everything, and she still didn't seem particularly moved, which was absolutely insane to me. That's when I demanded to know where she had gone. She told me she thought I had gone ahead without her, and that she was trying to catch up the whole time. I knew that was a lie because I walked all the way back to the fork, so there's no way I would have missed her. That's when it dawned on me that she might have had something to do with it. What that something could have been, I had no idea. The ride back was the tensest 45 minutes of my life. I kept looking over at her and wondering whether someone so innocent and nonchalant could do something so heartless and cruel. Honestly, the answer was probably yes. She got to my house, we said goodbye, and then I was alone again. I was still so shocked by the whole encounter. I couldn't get over the fact that within minutes of Sienna disappearing, two strangers appeared in the exact stretch of woods she led me into. The trail she picked, the fork she chose, and the position she put me in by letting me go first. It felt orchestrated. And then she just showed up after the whole thing without a scratch on her, asking me where I went. We didn't hang out a single time after that. I never asked her to, and if I wasn't reaching out to her, there was absolutely no chance she was going to reach out to me. I've told maybe 4 or 5 friends this story over the years, and the response is always the same. Sienna set me up. That she knew the trail and knew the people in the woods. I've considered that more times than I can count, but I just have no idea why anyone would do that. I have no idea where Sienna is now. She's not on social media, and I have no idea where she went to college.
Let's go! Mark the location. Please recall me. Wait. Help!
यार क्या बात है। बहुत है, प्लेयर भी है।
Please recall me. Wait. Don't give up. Your teammates can still recall you. Please recall me. Let's go. Let's go. Please recall me. I'm recalling a teammate. Thanks.
हाँ जी
Watch out! Marked a location. Marked an open door. Help! Watch out! Help! Watch out! Help! 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 Please recall me.